so that if you say, don't get confused when I ask a question about a type of bone, and then it gives you choices about shapes, or a type of bone and gives you choices about strength. Okay, so there's two different types of bone based on strength. There's spongy bone and there's compact bone. It's not at all that the spongy bone is weak, it's that the compact bone is very, very strong. The major structure of the spongy bone is this in these things called trabeculae. You tend to find spongy bone in epiphyses of long bones, adjacent to the medullary cavity, and regardless of where they are, that is to say where the spongy bone is, they're based on trabeculae, and these are these intricate webs of information, of structures. In contrast to spongy bone, I talked about compact bone, and I said that compact bone, it's not entirely, right? There's superficial, and there's elsewhere where there's compact bone, but we're going to say for right now, it's in the diaphysis of a long bone, and the functional unit of compact bone is called the osteon. So if I say to you, what's the functional unit of a compact bone, it's the osteon. And then I give you some vocabulary. Part of my intent on drawing was so that I gave you a vocabulary list, and then I could say, let's use the vocabulary. So on the right-hand side, this is in blue, this is a target, and this is one osteon. So there's 1, 2, 3 levels here, and each of those levels, it has a central hole right there. It has these individual layers right here. It has these little football-shaped things, and then it has these little lines. So those little lines are the canaliculi, and they connect adjacent lamellae. And each of those layers are called lamellae. This is 1 lamellae, 2 lamellae, 3 lamellae. These are something I've talked about for a long time now. Those are lacunae. They're in a number of different groups, a number of different structures, including different types of cartilage, spongy bone, and now compact bone. Because we're talking about bone, the cell that resides within that lacunae is an osteocyte. If we were talking about cartilage, it would be a different chondrocyte, right? So a different cell. And then, so the central canal is right in the middle. That's the target. That's the bullseye of the target. I can't show you the perforating canal, which is perpendicular to this. Osteons tend to run parallel to the length of a long bone, and perforating canals run perpendicular to it. And then finally, there's 2 different types of lamellae, which are these layers here. There's concentric lamellae, which is what I have here, and then there's circumferential lamellae, which are along the outskirts of the bone, and they are just deep to the periosteum. So they're, let's see what did I write here? Superficial and adjacent to the periosteum. So they're superficial. When I say superficial, I meant to say they're superficial to concentric lamellae, and they're adjacent to or deep to the periosteum. So I saved these notes as osseous notes, and they're on Brightspace. They're in Unit 2 lecture notes for fall 2024. So there's that. Any questions about that? I hope I tried to make it a little bit more clear. All right. So let me see if this will switch. So I mentioned a minute ago different types of bones, and we ended up talking about different bone shapes. And here's a couple of the shapes that we ended with. But, you know, we've had some discussions about other things, so let's start talking about something very important, something near and dear to my heart. I'm going to change gears for a second. I just wanted to show you a couple of my cars. Actually, the one up the top and the one on the right. The one on the right is my wife's car. That's a Jaguar. The one on the top is the one I drove today. No, that's my Bentley. This is my wife's Christmas present.
Where's your Bugatti?
Huh? No, that's a Bugatti. That's a 2024 Bugatti.
But are those
It hasn't come out.
But those are not yours yet.
No, that's mine. So that's mine. That's right down from Risky.
Did you take a no? No, you didn't.
You want some
I took that picture right down Risky. Right down by where we.
Oh, that looks like Risby, totally.
It absolutely. It wasn't this year. I didn't take it right now, but it was a little while ago. This is my wife's car.
What is that?
Mr. Or Doctor,
I'm not buying it.
we can see the.
You're not buying what?
We can see the little
Thank you.
symbol that they have on Google.
Thank you, Douglas.
No worries.
Douglas thinks it seems legit. So as a result, he gets 20 points extra for whatever.
You know what? Actually, suddenly I think it's legit.
Oh, all right.
No, it definitely looks so real now.
I think he's going to slide like his own.
So are there any questions about my vehicles?
Can we drive in one?
No, absolutely not. I almost ran over a student who tried to jump in my car. I said to her, we were coming back from CCRI in Providence. Well, I was going to take attendance there. I was doing what Miss Binninger did. I used to do what Miss Binninger does and what I do. And so then Miss Binninger took over part of my role. I was over there talking to the professor, and she let the students out early. So as we're going out, there's a group of Rhine students in front of me. This one girl, Sarah, jumps out, and she's like, Dr. Clancy, I'm getting in your car. I was like, nope. And I locked the doors, and I had my sunroof open. I can show you the sunroof. And I was like, if you try to get in here, I'm gonna run you over. There's no way in hell you're getting in my car. And she's like, why not? We're going to the same place. And I said, no. And what?
That's weird.
Why? What was weird? Oh, she was just goofing around with me. She was goofing around. She was going to Rhine. I was going to Rhine. That's what she said. Like she was just, and she was there. Like I had known her when she was in 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. Now she's at 12 plus.
Is it a fake story or is it real?
Excuse
It's
Wait a minute. This story is 100% real. The pictures are definitely real.
Oh yeah.
You said to me he's alive.
Which car did you try to jump in?
So I had an old car. Right? That was 2000. That was 2014.
So what did you have, a 2014 Benz?
So
At the
I don't
time?
remember what I had. I think I had a Benz at that time.
You didn't
But-
have a BMW? You just had a Benz?
No, I have a BMW at my home.
Oh.
I have a 95 BMW at home.
Why is it at home? What is use?
It's an antique car. I'm not. 749. So I got it.
I want to see a picture of it in your garage, Mr. Doctor.
1995 740i. That's in mint condition. Yeah, it's antique. It says antique.
How much are you gonna sell it for?
I haven't. It's actually. I'm
He
thinking about
loves
selling.
cars. He loves cars.
Give it to me.
Give it to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll give it to you if you give me enough money.
I'll give you $1 for it.
Okay. So this student did really try to jump in my car. I'm not kidding. And I said to her, "You try to get in the car. I'm driving over you. And more than that, you're gonna walk to Ryan." And she's like, "All right, let me." And then she ran and got in the other car. And then she said, "Why didn't you let me get in the car?" And I said, "There's cell phones around. All I need to do is have someone take a picture of a grown-ass man with a high school student, and they're not related. And, oh, it turns out it's his teacher, her teacher. Yeah, And she's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh. She's like, I just wanted to
no, this is not it.
I was like, no, I know that. But, all right. So that was some of that story was real, and I'll let you figure out what wasn't real. The part about Sarah, by the way, I have her contact information in my cell phone.
Okay, we're gonna ask her. Well, yeah, 'cause when we graduate, we could get our teacher's numbers, right?
I really wanted her to come to Rhine. She's a teacher right now. She's a teacher at Achievement First. I wanted her to come to Rhine and be my boss. That would be awesome.
Beat your boss?
No, be my boss and be my boss. Be the boss of the school. I want her to be my boss, and that would be awesome. That would be absolutely great. So Miss July, the new CNA instructor, is younger than Sarah, and she was in another graduate class. It's awesome to see. So what? How long ago was what? So 2015, so we started in, the first graduating class was 2014.
First graduating class was 2014.
But there's a picture
At
of the
Rhino.
phone.
We started at freshman year was 2011.
Yes. No.
You know they
So-
have to go through 4 years of high school.
So that group that's in 2011 is, we're juniors. So there's juniors, they spent their junior year here. We started the school with two classes. There's the juniors and sophomores. The juniors spent 3 years here because we had a postgraduate year that we don't have anymore.
What's the postgraduate?
And so they ended up graduating in 2014. And then the 10th graders graduated in 2015, and that's the group that girl.
That's a scam.
What was the postgraduate year?
It was similar to what the 12th grade year is now. We just started them in 10th grade instead of 9th grade. So let's get back to the question at hand, the topic at hand, which is osseous tissue. Yeah, my cars, that's right. Osseous tissue. This is the end of the week, right? We don't have school tomorrow or Friday. You do have work to do. There's definitely LT assignments to do. There's definitely quizzes to study for. When is their next quiz? Hey, Marie. Monday. Anything and everything that we talk about today can be on the quiz on Monday. Okay? 2 chapters, chapter on integumentary system and on this chapter, osseous tissue. So far, we've talked about the basics of anatomy in terms of and bones. We've talked about different shapes and different types. We've talked about the vocabulary associated with bones, a lot of that information. Now we're going to start talking about the physiology of bones. And in particular, we're going to talk about 2 different major topics here. The first is bone development or ossification. Ossification is simply the process of going from a soft, squishy bone to a hard bone. You guys all have hard bones, unless there's some medical issue. After we talk about that ossification process, that 2 processes, we're going to talk about how you go about bone repair, and then we're going to talk about the physiology of calcium in our body. And when I say the physiology of calcium in our body, what we need is calcium in the blood at an appropriate level. Calcium is an incredibly important cation. Wait a minute, I gotta say that. Calcium is an incredibly important cation, right? And I'm not gonna forget about that. So you're gonna be gone, like you're gonna be old and gray, and I'm still gonna be using that word cation, thinking about you. So calcium is an incredibly important cation, and it comes in from 2 sources. One source, the major source, is from the bone, and the other source is from our diet. And what I'll tell you in a minute is that our body can either get rid of calcium through urination. It can also get rid of calcium from the blood by storing it in bone. And then finally, we'll talk about how bones sort of malfunction, if you will. And when I'm talking about malfunction, I'm not talking about breaking. I'm talking about long-term chronic malfunctions of calcium imbalance. So let's start with bone development. There's 2 types here. There's intramembranous and there's endochondral. If you look at the first term, intramembranous, there's within a membrane. What are 2 membranes that we've talked about so far? There's periosteum and endosteum. Those are 2 likely culprits that we're talking about. As it turns out, it's basically going to be, the ossification process is going to be embedded in those membranes. If it's the periosteum that we're talking about, then we're going to be embedded making compact bone. If it's the endosteum that we're talking about, we're going to be making spongy bone. This generally takes place in embryonic connective tissue, but elsewhere as well. And it continues on throughout our lives. The other one that is much, much more obvious, or much more important, is endochondral ossification. That prefix endo, meaning within what? Within cartilage. What kind of cartilage? Hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant cartilage in our bodies. And developmentally, when we're born, our body is super flexible. When you're a baby, you can lay on your back. and put your feet in your mouth, put your fist in your mouth, put your feet behind your head, and it was not a big deal, right? It's hard now to do that. There's two methods of ossification. You have to understand the distinctions between them. Of the two endochondral, I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about endochondral ossification. They both produce compact bone after they're done, so you can't really tell what process was done after what process did what. And finally here, what I want to say is this thing right here, this process, remodeling. Bone is remodeled continuously throughout our lives until that remodeling process starts to break down. What remodel does, it means that it's maintaining the levels of calcium and other components, hydroxyapatite, phosphate, collagen, the other aspects of the extracellular portion of bone. It maintains that, and which cells are going to be maintaining that? The osteocytes. So let's start talking about intramembranous ossification. It starts with embryonic mesenchyme, and if you remember from mesenchyme, the mesenchymal stem cells are a form of connective tissue. So these mesenchyme is this connective tissue that we're really focused on here. Most skull bones, so in other words, the frontal bone, the parietal bone, etc., are the ones we're talking about here, forming this intramembranous ossification. Again, superficially, it's going to be within the periosteum. As there's a couple of areas there that are centers of ossification within the membrane, and we'll talk about fetal skulls next week, probably on Monday or Tuesday. But if you think about sort of the center of the parietal bone would be that bone prior to birth would be the area where it was being ossified first through intramembranous ossification. But towards the periphery of the parietal bone, where the parietal meets the sagittal suture and the coronal suture, those areas right there would not fully ossify. And so the process of intramembranous ossification, although it begins within in utero, it continues on afterwards. Okay, and so these soft spots, these fontanelles, are these membrane-covered structures. What are they going to be doing? They're going to be covered with connective tissue that then slowly but surely ossifies. It might take as much as 6 months or a year for babies and newborns to fully ossify their bones. So I mentioned this structure of the bones that are housed within, or cells of the bones rather, that are housed within lacunae are osteocytes, and that's what I have there. On the periphery of that would be right there. These cells right there are osteoblasts. So as this bone continues to form compact bone, it continues to form bone within this membrane. It slowly builds the bone around itself, and as it builds that bone around itself, then it goes from an osteoblast to an osteocyte. If it's compact bone, then it will form an osteon. If it has trabeculae, then it's spongy bone, and in this case, this is spongy bone. There are these cells called osteochondral progenitor cells, and a progenitor cell is a form of stem cell, and it can be either an osteo cell or a chondral cell. What is a chondral cell going to form? And an osteo cell will form bone. So these are our stem cells, they're embryonic stem cells, and these progenitor cells because there's also cartilage that's being formed too, right? So there's collagen that's formed, there's fibroblasts, right? That's also happening. But we're worried about osteoblasts first. The osteoblasts will then surround themselves. Once they're embedded in there, the osteoblasts become osteocytes. That's what I just set up there. On the left-hand side is a drawing. On the right-hand side is an actual histological section of this ossification process. So the first part, I just talked about forming spongy bone. Here is the developing bone at the top here, in the top left-hand part here, we have, let's just say, this is the skull bone, this is the parietal bone. So if this is the superficial, this is the periosteum, this is deep, this would also be the periosteum, this is compact bone, this is compact bone, and then within the developing bone, this is spongy bone. So this is a spongy bone sandwich, and you have ossification superficially or in the top, ossification on the bottom, and then ossification in the middle. Depending on where you are, in the top, the bottom, or the middle, you're making either compact bone or spongy bone. Again, on the left-hand side, you see a drawing, on the right-hand side, you see a histological section, and they match up pretty well. And once again, once this bone is formed, and once it's an adult, fully formed compact bone, for instance, you're not going to be able to tell me which process formed what. Right? In other words, unless you see the entire bone. Right? If you can see the entire bone, you can say, oh well, from I was told that I know that this bone was formed through intramembranous ossification because it's a flat bone. Okay, so you can do that, but you can't tell a difference in the structure of the bone itself. And so there's not much to say there. There is this area, these spaces right here, and notice there's little blood vessels that are drawn in there. These little blood vessels provide tissue or nutrients for the cells there, but also take blood vessels from this area because there's blood cell production. There's red marrow in there as well. There's not a lot of red marrow, but there's some. And that red marrow is also producing blood vessels too, or blood cells rather. As the process progresses, the trabeculae get bigger, the connective to the compact bone gets thicker, and the bone becomes more mature. That's really all that this is saying. Previous slide, you should know about the details, right? But if you go back to it, there's not a lot there. In contrast, there's a lot more here in endochondral ossification. So depending on where you are within the bone, and that is to say a long bone, let's just say that we're just worried about long bones. Depending on where you are within the long bone, you're either going to be forming principally compact bone, or a combination of compact bone and spongy bone. So on the epiphyses, you'll be forming compact bone and spongy bone. In the diaphysis, you'll be forming compact bone with a little bit of spongy bone adjacent to it, associated with the medullary cavity. Right? So it's important to recognize that. Ossification begins, it starts early on in the or in the developmental process. It starts with this hyaline cartilage. So when we were developing in utero, we started out from an individual cell through mitosis and cytokinesis. Right? We got a couple more cells, we added a couple more cells, and then you guys looked like footballs, and then you had a tail, and you had little limb buds, and then you had gills, and you lost your tail and your gills. And,
Come on now.
And so this stuff I'm not joking about, right? I'm definitely joking about the other stuff. So we really, really, really did have this stuff. And in utero, you can see these structures being present. Have very, very big eyes and a big old bulbous head, and then that brain starts growing superficially, superior and posteriorly.
Aren't we like the embryos, like human embryos, aren't we like very similar to like dolphins? Like obviously with the tail and the.
Yeah, so there's definitely similarities.
And then obviously we change.
Yes, and now this is not when you're in your 8th month here, okay? In utero. I'm talking about the first 3 weeks of developmental process, okay? So I'm not saying, you should be, you look just like a fish, right? I'm not saying that, right? You never grew functional gills. You had what are called gill slits, and there's an area called the pharynx, or the back of the mouth. The gill slits are associated with the back of your throat, and that's called the pharynx, and it's associated with the larynx, and that's sort of the process here. So while we're developing this, we're also building a whole bunch of hyaline cartilage, and that hyaline cartilage matrix forms what we know as our body right now. So that cartilage is built very, very quickly. It's super flexible in comparison to bone. And and again, now what are the cells that are going to be doing? They're going to be chondroblasts, then followed by chondrocytes, and then those chondrocytes are going to get replaced by osteoblasts and osteocytes. And that process is what we're exploring right now.
Isn't there like some cases where we don't lose our tails like in some cases? I feel like I've seen pictures of that before.
So there's absolutely developmental issues with people, right? I won't say that there's never been a person that's been born with a little bit of an extra, a couple extra coccyx bones. I would be suspicious about it. I don't know the answer to that. In terms of, so ossification starts very, very early on. It begins around 8 weeks or so around the second month. It is starting from hyaline cartilage, and it continues on. It might continue on until you're mid-20 or mid-teens rather, not 20s. There is that, I don't remember who I talked to, but growing pains. My kids especially would be like, my legs hurt, my knees hurt. I woke up and it just hurts. And that was when they're in the early teens. That growing pains there is caused by the length of the bone growing more rapidly than the muscles. So the bones are literally trying to rip the muscle off of the bone, and that's cause for pain. There is some actual conditions, one of which is called osteoid slaughter, is a condition where these bones, the bones are growing so fast that the child's muscles are basically potentially going to be pulling off of the tibial tuberosity. So that is a cause for concern.
So what happens in like cases of like dwarfism? Like, does the bone not grow?
So depending on, there's dwarfism and gigantism. Those are opposite ends of the spectrum. And in both cases here, one in dwarfism, the bones themselves, when we're talking about endochondral ossification, the entire process ends very, very quickly. In gigantism, where it almost doesn't end until there was one individual in particular that I'll show you. It was, I want to say it was 8'7". And so that
Isn't there
the
like a picture of him with like the smallest lady too?
Okay. So let's talk about the steps associated with endochondral ossification. So there's 5 major steps, and you need to know what's happening in each of these steps, what cells are involved, where in the bone. You need to know the details. So when we're talking about cartilage forming, we're talking about hyaline cartilage. We're not talking about elastic or fibrocartilage. The bone collar that we're talking about is embryonic, and that's sort of mushed in with what's called the primary ossification center. That primary ossification center, by definition, is always in the diaphysis, and by the time the individual has been born, the diaphysis is fully formed, the bone is compact bone. That secondary ossification center, you see it says post-embryonic, that secondary ossification center continues to change, to move, to extend, and as that extends there and grows longer and longer, that bone ultimately ossifies, and then the long bone growth stops, and your body stops growing height in post-embryonic. So that is when your adult bones form. So that process there is what I just described more generally here, but let's talk about specifics here. So in terms of the specifics, when in utero, when you're developing, so I'm not going to ask you the number of weeks. Here I said earlier 8 week. This says 9 weeks, but this is definitely early on in the developmental process. Okay, so very early on, as embryonically, there's cartilage formed, and that cartilage model. So that structure right here is called a cartilage model. That's largely hyaline cartilage. That hyaline cartilage are formed by these chondroblasts and then chondrocytes. And that's what it says right here. That model there has surrounded by, superficially, by the perichondrium, that perichondrium is analogous to the periosteum, but because it's cartilage, it's chondrium. That perichondrium is continuous with this, and it will become the joint capsule later on, and that's something that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the first step, back up, the first step is a cartilage model formation. So now this is after we had gills and a tail, we resorb our tail, we start growing limb buds, and then we have little paddles, and then we start lengthening our arms. As we lengthen our arms, that cartilage there, is what our arms were. Cartilage is what our legs were. The cartilage there now is getting longer, and then it has to ossify. As the cartilage begins to ossify, notice that the ossification center starts in what's soon to be the diaphysis of the bone. So not at either of the epiphyses or the ends of the bones, but in the diaphysis of the bone. So the first thing that happens is the collar of the bone superficially is ossified. So and that's called bone collar ossification. So that bone collar ossification is largely driven by osteoblasts, and it occurs within the periosteum. That and that's superficially. Then there are chondrocytes, and these chondrocytes are going to be doing their activity too. This is area right here is uncalcified, this is calcified. So this is bones, this is cartilage, this is cartilage, this is cartilage. As is developing, this is good connective tissue. As this is developing, we have blood vessels forming, and you also have nervous tissue invading this or innervating it, so that the whole thing will happen, right? This whole thing. As the chondrocytes develop here, eventually these chondrocytes will die, and then those chondrocytes will no longer be producing more cartilage here, but will then be replaced by bone. So this is through the third month and bone collar ossification. As this bone collar ossification continues here, the first step here is this primary ossification center. So basically, the primary ossification center is a well-developed bone collar formation. How do you distinguish it? Well, the first thing is you can see that there's that forming medullary cavity in the center. When you see the forming medullary cavity, you're no longer in the bone collar formation, because the bone collar formation is solid cartilage throughout. When you form the medullary cavity, that means that cartilage has been removed, and now you're starting to develop the medullary cavity, rather. At this point, the medullary cavity isn't very big, because it's largely spongy bone. So there's all trabeculae throughout here. Those trabeculae, again, are driven by osteoblasts and osteoclasts, right? So now you gotta get osteoclast activity in there as well, because you wanna get rid of material that you don't want, and you wanna build material that you do want. This primary ossification center is gonna be going on for, I don't remember what did I say? So 3 months. So this will be from 3 months through birth and then after that. So the primary ossification center is a major structure. So it starts within in utero, and it's going to continue on through adolescence, certainly young adolescence. That primary ossification center is the bone itself is going to be growing wider and stronger. It's also going to be growing longer, and it's going to be growing up from one end and then down from the other end. So it's going to be growing up on this slide and then down on that slide, and they grow in opposite directions. And once again, if you just look at this here, the osteoclasts remove bone from the center. That's what the osteoclasts are doing at that point, because you need to make this the medullary cavity functional for the body. And what is it going to be doing? Well, it's going to be making bone cells, right? So hematopoiesis, but also it's going to be helping fight infection, which is one of the functions of it. Yes.
So, osteoclast, like when it gets inhibited, that's decreasing calcium levels. when they stop.
Wait a minute, so decreasing calcium levels where?
In, like in the blood.
So when you decrease osteoclast activity, and we're gonna get to this today, but when you decrease osteoclast activity, then less calcium will be released into the blood. And so that basically turns the spigot down.
Okay, so osteoclast activity increases calcium?
Yes, it increases calcium in the blood,
Okay.
okay? Now, so we've talked about the primary ossification center. The primary ossification center is gonna be making that bone wider and stronger. It's also gonna be making the diaphysis longer. And while it's doing that, it's replacing hyaline cartilage with bone. In the center of it, it's gonna be replacing that hyaline cartilage with spongy bone, and then it's going to remove that spongy bone entirely. That removes that spongy bone entirely by osteoclast activity. As that the medullary cavity gets bigger, the osteons and the compact bone is going to be formed along the periphery. So that you have adjacent to the, associated with the periosteum right here, you have the medullary compact bone, the medullary cavity, again, with lots of blood vessels flowing in there. So that's on the diaphysis. The limit of once the diaphysis is fully formed here, then you start to see what's called secondary ossification. The secondary ossification occurs in the proximal epiphysis and the distal epiphysis. It starts in the center of the epiphysis, and then it progresses superficially, and it goes to the periphery, right? So it goes to the surface, and it doesn't continue everywhere. So here is the center of the secondary ossification center. Unlike the primary ossification center, where you have spongy bone, and then you have spongy bone removal, and then compact bone is left here, you're not going to remove the spongy bone in the secondary ossification center. The secondary ossification center is going to be filled with spongy bone, and superficially, it's going to then have compact bone. So where my pointer is going to have compact bone, and where this area right here is going to have spongy bone, and it remains spongy bone regardless of the bone and regardless of your age. Again, these the cells themselves are just the same ones that we've been talking about here. The spaces in the epiphyses are they do not form the medullary cavity, but they do have this space so that you can have red marrow forming eventually. And then the final thing that happens here is there's this plate or this line where my pointer is right there. That's the last portion to ossify. That's the last section to ossify. And that's called the epiphyseal plate. And then superficially, either where my pointer is right here, if this is a bone in anatomical position, this would be the proximal epiphysis. So where my pointer is, that area is going to have articular cartilage. So this little bit right here, and that area will never ossify. Okay, so some of it's going to ossify. It's going to turn into spongy bone, superficially compact bone, and then some of it will not ossify at all. The reason why it doesn't ossify, it's going to be forming this structure called articular cartilage, and we'll talk about that in the next unit. Here is more or less a picture of what I tried to draw yesterday with a long bone right here. There's a proximal epiphysis right here. There's articular cartilage, which is derived from that hyaline cartilage model. There's spongy bone in this proximal epiphysis with the epiphyseal line. It's no longer the epiphyseal plate. That epiphyseal plate is the area where the final area where it was ossified. Superficially here, there's compact bone around the epiphyses, so there's strong bones right there, right? And then going towards the diaphysis, that compact bone gets more significant because it's adjacent to the medullary cavity. Once the epiphyseal plate fully ossifies, that epiphyseal plate then becomes the epiphyseal line, and the individual no longer, almost said student, the individual no longer grows. So there's this structure, the closure of the epiphyseal plate happens somewhere between 12 and 25 years old. I'm surprised it's 25. I'm not gonna ask you exact dates. So when you're teenagers is when you stop growing. That's enough, right? In terms of the process itself, it's called oppositional growth. Oppositional growth means that the bones are going to be growing on the long bones. The bone is going to be added, new cartilage is going to be added on the superior and inferior portion of the epiphyseal line, or the epiphyseal plate, I'm sorry. The epiphyseal line, and then bone is going to be added closer, deep to that. We're closer to the medullary cavity. I'll show you a picture in a second. So that's called oppositional growth. And once again, that cartilage, that articular cartilage doesn't grow, or it doesn't ossify, I'm sorry. What's this?
That's an adult.
How do you know it's an adult?
Because they're all formed together.
Oh,
And there's
it's
barely
there.
any cartilage.
So, what's this bone?
That's your
That's the only.
No, it's a ulna.
So this is the ulna, that's the radius. What's that thing right there? Styloid process of the ulna. What bones are these? Carpals. What metacarpal is this?
5. Oh wait, that's just wait, is it?
Which one is this, Juliana?
3.
That one.
Thank you.
So, right, so that's the pollux up top. So that's where we're oriented, right? So that's what we're, adult or juvenile?
Adult.
How do you know?
Everything's there.
Well, everything's there, but well, but for juveniles, depending on how old the juvenile is, it's going to have medullary cavities. But you don't really see the medullary cavity here. It's not, right? But if you look in the, what is this? What area of this metacarpal would this be?
The area of the metacarpal?
Yes.
Are you pointing towards like the articular cartilage?
So the articular cartilage would be right here. So what area? So what area would this, of this metacarpal? What area would that be? Diaphysis. So what area is that?
Oh, that's a peak, but I don't even know how to say it. Epiphysis.
So the epiphysis.
Yes.
Which one?
That's it. That's the word.
Which one?
That's gonna be the proximal. If you're
Wrong.
talking about to the, oh.
So this is the distal epiphysis, right? So let me put my pointer here. So this, where this arrow is, right there, that is the distal epiphysis of that bone. The other side is the proximal epiphysis of that bone. That's why last week when I was doing the mini practical, I'm talking about those anatomical terminology. If you get those things mixed up, it's going to come back to bite you again. So proximal and distal, these things are
I
very.
don't know what point of attachment you were talking about, either the carpals or digits.
But for this, I said for this bone. All right, so for this bone, there's a proximal and a distal epiphysis. If I say, where on this limb is this point compared to this point, right? Then the first point was proximal, this point is distal, right? But that's a different question. I will absolutely ask you, where is this point on the bone? And this is a distal epiphysis, this is a proximal epiphysis.
But aren't they technically both points of attachment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a feeling too, Alan, but.
So there are points of attachment, but which portion of the bone is closer to the point of attachment? This is definitely closer to the point of attachment than that. Right? So this is definitely proximal. That's definitely distal. Now, what are we looking at here?
A juvenile.
So these are x-rays, and these are good x-rays. Now, look at what's happening right here. What is this? What material is right there?
Is that cartilage?
So I'm not sure. You just asked me that. I asked you. What is it? What kind of cartilage? Hyaline cartilage. Right, so hyaline cartilage is right there. See this arrow right here? Over time, the arrows are shifted a little bit. See this arrow right here? This arrow right there? That's sort of shifted. That arrow right there. What are those 3 arrows pointing to?
The epiphysis? That one? Or is it the, was it the D one? It was not the border.
Is it like the epiphyseal line?
So what's the difference between the plate and the line?
Yeah, the plate's soft, like out of cartilage, and then
The
line
plate
like
is
when it's
cartilage.
ossified.
Right? Can you see this little space right here?
Yeah.
So X-rays look at hard tissue. Bone is hard, much harder than cartilage, and therefore you get a bigger signature right here, or right here than right here. So there's more white right here, so there's more, this is harder. This part right here is cartilage, and that cartilage is the epiphyseal plate. In the previous slide, where those same arrows were, they're at the either epiphysis. There wasn't a major distinction. That hand was already ossified. So in this case, this is a juvenile hand, and you can see this really obvious one right here. Right? So there's an epiphyseal plate, and this is the epiphyseal plate of what bone?
Radius.
This is the radius. And so now, 1, 2, 3, 4, this kid only has 4 carpals. Are they developmentally challenged?
No,
No,
because it hasn't fully grown yet.
Right.
The bones haven't ossified.
they haven't ossified yet. So it appears that the cartilage is separating, the cartilage is developing into bone, right? But the X-ray can't detect that. Right? Now, I want to get back to the process of ossification when you're talking about growing. So look at this, this is metacarpal number 5. Right. Now, look at this area right here. You're going to have, as the child grows, the hand is going to grow bigger, the 2 bones are going to grow longer in this way. Right, not that long, right? But they're still going to grow longer in this way. At this point right here, you're going to have new cartilage distally, and as the new cartilage added distally, the bone is going to start growing, the entire thing is going to start growing that way. But now, you don't want that epiphyseal plate to get bigger. If you don't do something proximally, then that epiphyseal plate will get bigger. And that's something that you don't want to do, or the body doesn't want to do. So proximally, the epiphyseal plate will ossify. So this part ossifies, this part adds new cartilage, new hyaline cartilage, and in the process then, it grows down and to the left. As it grows down and to the left, the other portion of the bone goes up and to the right in the same process, and that's called oppositional growth. One goes that way, the other goes that way, so that happens on all of these bones, including the phalanges, and my favorite phalange too. Right? So you can see that part right here. So this part right here would add cartilage, this would add bone, until the bone catches up to the cartilage, and then it fully ossifies, and then there's no more bone growth. This is a secondary ossification center.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when the bone does grow and the cartilage is growing, once they connect, is it gonna soon become articular cartilage because they have to be
So,
with each other?
wait a minute, the articular cartilage is something different, okay? So we're just talking about bone, conversion of cartilage, hyaline cartilage to bone. This is the secondary ossification center. Now, I'm gonna back up one slide. Articular cartilage is present here. Where my pointer is, there's articular cartilage, and I said superficially on either epiphysis, there's going to be articular cartilage. That articular cartilage was converted from hyaline cartilage. It's essential. It's different then, but it's more substantial than hyaline cartilage. But it is articular cartilage. It's not ossified. So how many of you can crack your knuckles? Right? How many of you can make a fist? Right? So how do you do that? Right? Through movement of this. How many of you can do this? Right? So you can move your fingers. You don't want those bones. Thank you very much. You don't want those bones to be mashing into one another. If you mash into one another, you may create friction. And what's that called?
Arthritis.
Arthritis. So that arthritis, we'll talk about that later on in unit 2, or unit 3 rather. The arthritis is basically, the articular cartilage wants to prevent that. There's other structures associated with that too. But at this point, where my pointer is, that the articulation here has articular cartilage. That's derived from the hyaline cartilage, and it's never ossified.
Yeah, that's what I said, like, once the bones form fully, the articular cartilage is between those two.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay.
When you grow old, doesn't that articular cartilage like start to ossify? Like really, really old?
Why are you talking to me?
I think you're the most experienced.
Because
Um,
you would know.
Like, no, I'm joking.
So articular cartilage,
You said
so
that it doesn't ossify, but like when you're really, really old,
It breaks down instead.
It breaks down instead.
yeah, our articular cartilage doesn't ossify, but it does degrade. It does lose water. It does lose other components of it. It becomes less flexible, and then the joints articulations start breaking down. So last year, Miss Campbell had shoulder surgery, and she asked me about. She's like, I'm really worried about surgery. You know, I'm worried about it. And I was like, don't worry about it. Here's what they're going to do. It's like they're going to drill 2 holes right here, 2 holes right there. They're going to root in there, fix everything up. It's going to take like 45 minutes. You're going to go to sleep. You're going to wake up. It's nothing.
Wow, that's not concerning at all.
I said, wait, now first of all, I could not do it, right? I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. There's no way in heck I could do that, right? It's all robotic. It's really cool. I had it done. I said, so it's not a problem, right? That part's easy. I said, but the problem is the recovery.
Oh.
The recovery is going to be months. It's going to be so much pain. And if you ever see me walking in the hallway, I always go, hey, Miss Campbell, high five. And I try to reach up as high as I can. And then she goes like this. She's like this. And one of the problems is that she hasn't done her exercises. She wasn't able to get that mobility. So back in the old days, back when that girl tried to jump in my car, I had shoulder surgery before that. And before that, I couldn't go like this. It was in pain. I was just in pain all the time. I'd go to work, and I'm left-handed. Right now, I can do this. I can scratch my back. I can scratch my left hand. I'm really happy about that. But the articular cartilage, you don't want you want that articular cartilage to be there so that the movement doesn't get impeded, and that's what's happening with Miss Campbell. Hopefully, she's getting better. So it's just a long process. So I've spent a lot of time talking about bone length. I'm not as worried about bone width because as the bone gets longer, it also gets wider. But if you think about this, if you're going to get the bone wider, right? You don't want and as you get it wider, you want to add new bone on the periphery, superficially, and then you don't want just to keep that other bone there because then that just gets too heavy. Right? So you want to remove bone deep, add bones superficially, and in the process it gets wider. The medullary cavity gets wider, and this would be an adult bone. This is a child bone. And I'm not going to worry about that much. Right there. So let's talk a little bit about some things affecting bone growth. Have I ever mentioned calcitriol? No?
Yes.
Where is calcitriol and what's it from?
Taking
That's a
menstruation.
great question.
It's vitamin D, that's right. Where can we get vitamin D?
Sun.
From the sun. What system helps produce vitamin D? The integumentary system, right? In addition to vitamin D, you can also absorb it from the diet. You can lose it through urination. If you don't have enough vitamin D in your body, you can have a couple of different conditions there, rickets and osteomalacia. The prefix osteo meaning bone, right? There's softening of the bone. That malacia means softening. Vitamin C is required for collagen synthesis. So I mentioned a little while ago, as you're building new bone, all the while you're building that bone matrix, and we talked about the hydroxyapatite and the phosphate and the Calcium being in the major component of the bone, while you're doing that, you need to build collagen too. If you don't build collagen, because you're lacking vitamin C, that could be a problem too. And one of the things that sailors in a long time ago, 16, 17, even 1800s, they would bring fruit on board, and so that they would eat limes and lemons and oranges and stuff. Those have lots of vitamin C, so that would help prevent scurvy, this deficiency of vitamin C.
If you have scurvy, don't like all your old scars start to open up too?
So wounds don't heal, your teeth can fall out. So yeah, so it's not fun.
Seems like it.
Other things affecting bone growth. We've talked about lengthening of bone in the context of of human development from birth to early adulthood, right here. So HGH, or human growth hormone, thyroid hormone is formed in the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland, we'll talk about that. Actually, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So the thyroid gland produces TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. There's this, it helps grow a lot of stuff, and then generally also reproductive hormones, estrogen and testosterone in particular. So all those things affect bone growth. When you're talking about bone health, when you're talking about, you guys are all normal, healthy individuals, except for one person who should be walking on crutches, who's developing, and I won't tell what her name is. But the process of maintaining bone is called remodeling. Bone remodeling occurs as the chondrocytes, the osteocytes, whatever it is, whatever the sites are that we're talking about here, they're making new bone and they're removing old bone. So if you think about this, if we wanted to remodel this building right here, or this room, right, we take the walls down and we put up new walls. We're not building a new building, right? Hopefully over the years, Ryan and I, if we do end up occupying that whole building, right, we're gonna remodel that whole building and slowly but surely make it nicer and nicer. That remodeling process occurs throughout your life, and it is a combination of bone repair, ion regulation, calcium ion regulation, and then also as your activities either increase or decrease, the response of your bones can change over time. So the relative thickness of the bone can change if your bone, if you do a lot of extra physical activities. The strength of your bones will increase if you're really working out hard, and the strength of the bone will decrease if you spend a long time. When I say long time, I'm not saying months, I'm talking about years or perhaps decades. Decades you're gonna slowly but surely lose bone strength. So that process of bone remodeling here is this ongoing process, and it's one of the reasons why you should always be active as much as you can, because your bones really are living things, right? This table, these desks and this podium is not going to change in length or strength, right? Any appreciable time, but over time, you definitely can change your strength of your bones. So I think what I want to do now is about 9:30, 9:35. So how about let's take 10 minutes? So 9:45 to 9:50 or so. Let's say 15 minutes.